And a little bit more on that, I'm joined now by Kent Lardner. Hi, Kent.
Hi, Veronica.
In our August joint suburb trends and elephant in the room monthly update, we discussed property markets across the country and the lead indicators for price movements, of which inventory levels is one of the strongest. Which market segments are showing to be the most resilient at the moment?
We've looked at a number of areas across Australia, and suburbs that are standing out seem to be on the periphery of the city, but in some of those more established premium locations. So, for an example, we've got to the north of Wollongong, we've got to the north of Sydney as well, and we've got another suburb up in Newcastle doing rather well.
So when you say they're in the established areas, I guess what you mean is they're not on the urban fringe pushing out, the endless house and land package territory.
Staying right away, yeah. The house very far away from house and land packages.
So those suburbs now, I'm going to name them. I mean, there was Barowra, there was Bulli. This is a B theory here. And then there was, which is the one in Newcastle? Mayfield in Newcastle.
Yes.
And what's the common denominator there?
The common denominator is very low inventory levels, which is supported by low days on market. So typically in any of these very tightly held suburbs, the properties come on and they're bouncing out within a month. So typically below 30 days on market, and inventory levels between 1 and 2 months, or actually lower in some cases.
And so just to clarify, obviously inventory levels means that you're working out the average amount per month that is sold in these areas, and then how much stock is currently available, and looking at that as being basically an indicator that, well, prices could be under pressure to rise here because there's just simply not enough stock around.
Yeah, our testing says in Australia, equilibrium in Australia is around that 7-month mark. So typically there's no pressure upwards or downwards on price. It's reasonably balanced, doesn't benefit a seller or a buyer. But when we get down to those figures of around 1, 2, 3, maybe even into 4 months of inventory, there's some upwards pressure on price. And then at the other end of that, typically we're at 8 months or higher, we're seeing some downward pressure on price, and it's certainly favouring the buyers.
It is interesting that the 7 months seems to be the magic marker. I mean, I know in Sydney, if something's sat on the market for 7 months, there's something really wrong with it. So you're talking Australia-wide. How does that, I guess, what are the two ends of that spectrum?
Yeah, so typically we're counting total number of listings and the average volume that sells each month. So it's a measure that's a very nice measure that you can apply nationally. Whereas days on market's quite an interesting one. When you look at days on market, sometimes you find some areas take a lot longer to sell. It's just the nature of the particular suburb. Whereas inventory levels, by and large, yes, there are some geographical variances to it, but it's a great metric that's widely used in the US as well. The US seem to gravitate to around 6 months being their level of balance of a market, whereas my testing has indicated at the moment, Australia might be around that 6, probably closer to 7 months as a balanced market.
So those outer areas, potentially, do they offer bigger homes? I mean, because, what we see hearing anecdotally is that with lockdown, people are saying, right, well, if I'm going to work from home part of the time, I definitely need an extra bedroom. So they've got to go where they can get more space for their dollar. Would you say that might be leading to this?
It could be. Mayfield is not necessarily one suburb that's got very large houses, but Bulli's got a lot of, for the properties that do become available for sale in Bulli, a lot of them are rather luxurious, large, renovated houses. The list median is close to about $1.2 million. So you do get a big house in somewhere like Bulli. Barowra, the same thing. It's a fairly small suburb, only a couple of thousand homes there, but certainly a lot of the houses are 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom as a typical profile.
And not a lot of rental stock.
Very low inventory, very low rental tenure in Barowra. So that's a standout for me because only a couple of suburbs down the road, we've got very, very high vacancy rates. A lot of units have come on the market down Asquith, down towards Hornsby. So there's a lot of rental stock there that would otherwise be potentially impacting that suburb. But because the rental tenure for Barowra is so low, it's less impacted by anything that happens in the rental market.
Which does lead us to talk about your list of cool spots or cold spots. You've got a list on your website. Now I look at the list of the top 10 or the bottom 10, depending on how you want to look at that. And I can see that the usual suspects, which is along those same lines, your high density, newly developed areas, but also holiday units dominate. Poor old Darwin's thrown in for good measure. How do you measure inventory levels in an area where, say, there's a lot of new development of apartments or new subdivisions are being released, such as Astral, which is one of the suburbs on the top of the list?
Yeah, one of our challenges with new inventory and around the world, they do seek to, a lot of countries seek to split out new inventory and metrics that pertain to new stock versus established stock or secondary markets. But one of the problems we've got, or the challenges we need to focus on, is with new house and land packages, typically it's a block of land with a rendered image of the house that they're promising to build for you. So that's a bit of a conundrum, because we do count them or we don't count them, and there's no rhyme or reason as to what's absolutely the best answer there. But we do count them, and what that does is it typically pushes up the inventory level in these house and land packages, even though the holding costs for a developer are significantly lower.
Yeah, and I guess it does have an impact too on the people that own established properties in those areas, because of course for them selling, they're competing with all this new stock.
You are competing, so it is a bit of a challenge. And we go through, I look at Austral and I pull out, or any of these new house and land packages, I look for properties that are secondary, that are trying to compete against the new house and land. So you don't have the incentives, you don't have the marketing might of the large developers, and a lot of those properties are staying on the market for well over a year.
Depressing. Now, on that note, for those of you that would like to hear more about these hot and cold spots, check out the Elephant in the Room Property Podcast and look for the Suburb Trends episode. We're bringing out one a month, and they're available on both Apple and Android platforms. Now, thank you so much for your time, Kent. I'm looking forward to catching up with you again next month for an update.
Thank you. Thank you, Veronica.